we have the first coaching change of the NHL season. Welcome to Short Shifts, part of the NHL Wraparound podcast. Vic Morren and Neil Smith. And again, we are joined by Kevin Paul Dupont from the Boston Globe. We had a great conversation on Monday. We documented the numerous problems going on with the Boston Bruins, and the shoe finally fell yesterday on head coach Jim Montgomery. Kev, thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure. We could go around the league and extort coaches and for us not to talk about them, and maybe they'd stay on the job. So nobody's surprised here. I think just because of the way it had gone, 8-9-3, and was really the number of things we talked about, they were just floating aimlessly here. And again, you can have a very long conversation here about whether it should have been the coach or management. As we know, management never fires itself, but certainly what they've done here, Don Sweeney and Cam Neely, is basically put themselves in the crosshairs. If this doesn't pick up, it really will point to what I think it is a poorly engineered roster.
His numbers, Jim Montgomery's numbers are phenomenal since he got the job. They're just outstanding. He's number one. The Boston Bruins are number one in the NHL in almost every single category, including points percentage since he's been there, wins 120, regulation wins of 95. I mean, you couldn't have done a better job than he's done. In all my years, Kevin, and I'm of watching the NHL and watching the craziness that goes with it, this has got to be one of the most scapegoat firings I can think of that I ever remember. Like it's almost, it goes down to the level of David Quinn being fired in San Jose last year. Like, what did you really expect from David Quinn? So then you go over to, and then the Toronto one too. I want to touch on that because Sheldon Keefe. What more did you really expect out of Sheldon Keefe than to lose in overtime of Game 7 and get fired after 300-point seasons? And with Jim Montgomery, like, what more could he have done? So I'm just wondering, from your standpoint, as somebody who has to tell the Bruin fans what's going on, what does management say to that? Like, what's their answer to that? I'm sure they got asked, like, why did you do this?
Yeah, that will come today. All they did was put out a release yesterday. So I'm having heard it before, Neil, I suspect they'll say that does point to them as well. But they're on the job and they've made this move. I mean, I've heard this through countless coaching changes here. Not all of them with Sweeney and Neely. But it was the Claude Julien hire, and then firing, I should say. And then it was the Bruce Cassidy firing. But I don't think, whatever they say, I think it's readily apparent at this point that they spent the huge money over the summer, $84 million, and they've gotten very little from it. And we talked on Monday, we talked about a whole lot of precipitating factors here, among them the culture change of losing Krejci, losing Bergeron, going back farther with Chara. So they just haven't done a very good job here of replacing what was a great talent and a great talented core and culture. And really, hand in hand with some very bad drafts, non-productive drafts. If ownership isn't watching, then I suppose it will perpetuate. But I have to believe at this point, ownership is looking at these guys very closely, and if it's just going to peter out here, maybe they would. But they're very slow to change in Buffalo. It's a very profitable product here. The only thing that changes the dynamic, and this was in the pre-Joe Thornton era, is when the fans walk, and they're fortunate, ownership and management, that it's a very loyal fan base.
And when you said Buffalo, just to explain to the fans who are listening that they think you might have misspoke, I know you didn't. The Jacobs business is in Buffalo, and so therefore the higher decisions are made in the city of Buffalo about the Bruins because that's where Jeremy Jacobs is. Go ahead, Vic. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
Good point.
No. And Kevin, you talked about the fans walking, and things were already somewhat tenuous going into Monday night's game against Columbus, and a 5-1 thrashing, a quick deficit, 2 shorthanded goals against. And if there was ever a tipping point against a club that is not expected to make the playoffs, that have dealt with their own adversity, this is probably the thing that just pushed it over the edge.
No question. Yeah, 2 shorties in your own building against a bottom feeder like Columbus. And again, no emotion, no pushback, nothing that resembled the sport or the team that people here are accustomed to. Now, some of them are still clinging to that old image of big bad Bruins, and that is decades gone by now. But it just wasn't representative of what they have been, a good team, dumb plays. So, and hey, it's no surprise. We've seen coaches take the hit for this a million times over. And I would say what runs through this one most significantly is the lack of emotion. And that does ultimately, no matter who the coach is, that does come to the coach. Now it behooves the players to find it, but if the coach can't rally it, if you're still on the job as the general manager, I think you do have to make a change.
Does this franchise still carry the baggage of 2 years ago? 65 wins, 135 points equals so what? Because they didn't win the cup, and they did get off to a very good start last season, and then it started to slip a little bit. And, you just have to think, had they won the cup, whether we would be in the spot that we're in today.
Yeah, probably not, because that cup has probably a 3 to 5 year grace period, right? So they'd only be a year plus into that. But that said, Vic, they flamed out. There's no question about it. They didn't look good when they had Bergeron and Krejci, and there were mitigating factors there. If you remember, the last game of the season, regular season, Bergeron played at Montreal. It was kind of a farewell game in his town, if you will. Not that Montreal was his town. He's a Quebec City kid. But he wanted to play. It didn't make any sense. There was really no virtue in him playing other than to make it, sort of a hat tip to the Forum and the Quebec crowd. Then he gets hurt. So he was off the entire first round, and they got knocked out. Last year, and that said, in both instances, you can very much question how Jim Montgomery handled his goaltenders. You can also get into the fact last year in the 2 rounds against Toronto, they came out with horrid starts, 1 shot or 2 shots in the first period in the playoffs, right? So there were questions. I mean, Montgomery isn't beyond criticism, and I think he'd be the first to say that. He had his issues getting them going, and again, that's that tug and pull between, is it the coach or is it the players? I think by and large, there's equal culpability here among owners, players, the coach. Had they won, we saw what it did to get to Game 7 of the Cup final in 2019. That kept Bruce on the job, and Bruce Cassidy did an excellent job. I was surprised he was fired, but they're full of surprises here.
Did you ever get the sense, Kevin, from covering this team for the last 2 years, the Montgomery years, did you get the sense that any of the players thought that they could be better with somebody else, or that they ever felt that they weren't getting what they needed from the coach? Because sometimes I know that does come through especially to you guys, the beat writers and that are around them all the time. Did you get that sense at all?
Nothing profound. Certainly, I had that sense when Cassidy left, because Cassidy had been, by some of their interpretation, too hard on him, and that Jake DeBrusk was, I'm not going to call him the leader of the pack, but he was a prime example. So I think very much part of firing Cassidy was due to the grousing among the working help. If they were grousing this time again, I think it would have been a big mistake by management to be listening to that. But I didn't get a sense of it. I really didn't. I think by and large he was like Jim Montgomery. The nickname for him here was kind of Mr. Rogers because everything was okay and not critical of players, certainly in the media at all. Whereas Bruce would be. Bruce was just very blunt. So I thought at times I was expecting more from Montgomery in that sense. But as a player, I think I would like it. So, and again, you never know, even as the beat guy who's around it a lot, especially in this era, because our time, Neil, in the room and be able to talk to guys is so choked off now, and was before the pandemic, was increasingly more then. And there's a million reasons here, but a lot of it is the teams don't want the beat guys in there for any extended period of time. That's part of it. And the other part is the team wants the material itself to cultivate its websites and have that material and make money off of it. So the message is very much getting controlled. The irony to that is if as the consumer, if you really watch those videotapes of players talking, 90% of the time, it's the beat guys who are asking the questions. So the teams are actually making money off the back of the beat people.
Kevin, now that the change is complete, Joe Sacco taking over, he's been with the organization since 2014, and he does have 4 years of head coaching experience with the Avalanche between 2009 and 2013. What does he bring to the table besides just a new face as the bench boss, even though he obviously has plenty of tenure with the club?
Well, I think there should be, from the player side, there should be a comfort here. They should know after all these years. I was kidding when you were stumbling for what year he joined them. I was going to say 1924, the 100-year anniversary coming up. He's been here a long time, Joe. But what Joe has going for him, in my estimation, is that they know him. It's not like they've got to come in and when they had Mike Keenan tossed in their lap, 8 games into that season. They know who he is, so that kind of removes any excuses on their side. I think what Joe has going for him is that he's been here before, and I think by and large you see guys with second chances, even though it took a long time for him to get his second chance, as it did for Bruce Cassidy. Generally they do well off of it. So I think that's good. It's also, he's got the bona fides. He had a long career in the NHL, certainly was not a premier player by any chance. I think that usually trends better than a deficit in the sense that he knows what it takes. I had this discussion with him over the summer when they moved him up to associate coach. And he said the biggest difference in terms of his playing days versus now is the players really do demand that you explain things. If they're going to sit out, if they're coming off the number one power play, whatever it is. And he does understand that. So I think he'll have that communication factor going for him. And we'll see if the rest of the coaching bench, if you will, be it Chris Kelly or Jay Leach, if they have more of an impact under him than with Montgomery. I don't know that, but that could be the case too. And they're the guys like them as well.
Kevin, I want to just comment that both Brian Burke and myself called Harry Sinden and asked him if they had lost their minds when he hired Keenan. So we did try for the Bostonians. We did try, both of us. But getting to the very last thing I wanted to ask you, because we see this all around the league, and I probably was guilty of this. Maybe I would have to think back, but they go from a coach that's hard on them to a player's coach, to coach that's hard on them to a player's coach, to a coach that's hard on them. Is that what we're going to see here when we went from Cassidy to Montgomery, now to Sacco?
I'd be surprised. I think when we talked about this in the context of where was Montgomery going to go on Monday, when we talked on Monday, I felt that his only chance was to put on sort of this different face and lean into these guys harder. I could be surprised here, and maybe Sacco takes that, harder edge. I doubt it. I think he's going to come in here. I think his best play would be they know who he is. I think if he were to try that, it would look phony. And that goes nowhere. As you guys know, you got to be what you are. But I do think he'll come in and try to, this may be me thinking of my approach and not knowing his, but if I were him, I would try to reframe some of these guys. Get that last game when Pasternak didn't land a shot on net. You know what? You got to shoot. Get McAvoy to a more physical game, a shooting game. So I think he'll rise and fall as coaches do on the backs of the 3 to 4 most talented players in the room. And it's going to take, they're not stupid. Typically talented players are also generally the brighter players too. You don't get many guys who are top end performers who are box of rocks. And that's the case in this room. They're intelligent guys. They're playing intelligent. They have hockey IQ. They're smart enough to know where their games are short. So I would expect them to be not tough love, but sort of that cerebral love, which is, this is what you do best. This is what I got to have you do, and find out if that's a motivating factor.
Well, we really appreciate you coming back again 48 hours after you were kind enough to come on NHL Wraparound, and you come back again and are so gracious in doing that. We'll wait and see. I think Boston is a great story this season because nobody saw this coming.
Absolutely. Hand up here.
Yeah. So thanks, Kevin, and continued good luck and great writing, and we'll be following you.
Thanks, lads. I'll look forward to doing it again.
And Neil, so much great insight from Kevin Dupont. And I know, this one hit hard for you also because Montgomery on a personal level, and you've had to fire head coaches before. And, you'd mentioned how difficult it was when you let your first coach go with the New York Rangers, and that was Roger Nielsen.
Yeah, that for me was very difficult. It felt like I was, firing my mentor. And so that one was very difficult. I only fired 2 in 11 years, and Colin Campbell was the other one. When we got he got very burnt out, and it seemed like I was almost doing him a favor. Yeah. The situations weren't at all like this, where a guy had done such an amazing job like Montgomery's done for 2 seasons. And then in the 3rd season, they get off to what some would argue is almost a 500 start. Yeah. And you fire the guy. Now, it just seemed to me, it reminded me of the David Quinn firing in San Jose. Like, you didn't give him any players. Right. And when he doesn't get the results because he doesn't have the players, you fire him. It would be like firing Luke Richardson in Chicago. I mean, what has he got to work with? He hasn't been fired, by the way, thankfully. He's another guy that I know and I like very much. But with these bottom feeder teams, and I'm not talking about Boston now, but the San Jose's, the Chicago's, the Columbuses. I mean, your expectations have got to be realistic. And the other thing I want to just mention quickly, Vic, is while Jim Montgomery gets fired with a 715 point percentage, yeah, Mike Sullivan just keeps on trucking along with a 400 win percentage. Like, he's in his 8th year or something like that, and missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. I'm not advocating to fire Mike Sullivan either. I'm just saying, like, the irony of Jim Montgomery and Mike Sullivan, and it just goes to show you the expectation level of the Bruins and their fans and their owners, as opposed to the expectation level of the Penguins and their owners and their fans, even though their owners are Boston based, by the way. Fenway Group owns the Penguins. But different place, different expectations. You know, maybe it's best that you don't get these high profile teams to coach. Maybe it would be better if you got Arizona/Utah and you lasted 5, 6, 7 years. But it's the way it is in the league. And Jim Montgomery will be back. And I hope when he comes back, he does a great job. And I hope like Cassidy, I hope when he gets his next job in the first year on that job, he wins the Stanley Cup like Cassidy did. You fire Cassidy and he wins the cup that next season.
And I'm sure that there are plenty of general managers that are taking notice now that Montgomery is available. So certainly stay tuned because he's not going to be unemployed for very long. So let's move over to some injury news. You know, usually we hold that for the back end of the show, but this is so significant that we're going to get the MASH unit out of the way first. So Alex Ovechkin is listed as week to week. He had a left leg injury in a collision with Jack McBain on Monday evening. And Ovechkin has missed only 59 games and only 35 due to injury. He's going to have some additional testing on Wednesday to determine the exact timeline for his return. Yes, and that's 59 games in 20 seasons. 20 seasons.
20 seasons, yeah. So, I mean, it looked to me to be bad because I've seen this so many times. When I say bad, I'm talking that he's coming back in 5 or 6 days. I think he's going to be out for, 3 weeks, let's say. And that's being optimistic, I think. So, but he's a warrior, but he is 39 years old.
Auston Matthews is in Germany, of all places, for an upper body injury. He has played his last game on November 3rd. He's missed 6 games. The Leafs are 5-1-0 without him. So he's over in Europe with a specialist for additional consultation. I believe there's a team doctor there also. But there is some optimism that it's very possible Matthews could return sometime in the middle of next week. I think they're looking at a game against Florida a week from Wednesday. So a little bit of intrigue here, simply that he's got his own guy that he's comfortable with, kind of the way that, Jack Eichel consulted his own doctors when he had his back surgery. So looks like more and more teams are more permissive about having athletes use their own physicians to make certain diagnoses.
And I'm sure in conjunction with the Leafs doctors, because, when you've got a contract with a player that's guaranteed, you're going to want to make sure that the medical care, you are supervising whatever medical care it is, but they're allowing players to have an opinion on what they need. And the Jack Eichel thing, which led to the demise of the Buffalo Sabres and Jack Eichel marriage, he's gone on to do great things in Vegas. So it looks like Jack was right and the Sabres were wrong. At least it looks like that at this point.
Sure does. So let's look at some of the other injuries that are making news. Calle Jarnkrok, has not played this season for the Maple Leafs. He is now listed month to month with a sports hernia. Darnell Nurse, who took that really awful hit from Ryan Reeves on Saturday night, he is now expected to be out 5 to 10 days. Speaking of the Golden Knights, Mark Stone on IR with a lower body injury, although he could come back in the next few days. Ben Hutton, long-term IR. He's a defenseman for the Golden Knights. Earliest that he can return is December 12th. For the New York Islanders, this is a little bit of distressing news. Defenseman Mike Riley, who played very well for them at the back end of last season, had a heart procedure for a pre-existing yet previously undetected condition. This is not related to the concussion that he suffered in Buffalo on November 1st on a hit by Jordan Greenway. And again, Riley out long term. Speaking of Greenway, he's week to week with an undisclosed injury, but the injuries do not only lie with the players here. And on Monday evening, there was a frightening incident with referee Mitch Dunning colliding with Avalanche defenseman Josh Manson, and he was stretchered off the ice. But the good news, he's back home and expected to make a full recovery, although we don't know when he'll be back on the ice. And Neil, this was kind of similar to Steve Kazari back on April 6th in the game between Tampa and Florida when he collided with Hayden Fleury. And, you know, it just goes to show how vulnerable these officials are, because these athletes are coming at full speed. They're fully padded. And as you know, the referees don't have nearly that much protection.
No, they don't have that much padding on them. They have some, obviously, because they got to be protected, their elbows, their shins, and different parts of them. But, you know, people have to understand too that, you know, people are moving around the ice at 20 miles an hour on those skates. And, you know, this is not like in football, baseball, or something else where when the play is away, people are just standing still in shoes. They're moving. And, you know, we see players get knocked out by their own teammates sometimes when they mistakenly hit each other. So of course you're going to get a referee or a linesman who's, going to get injured if he comes in, you know, in contact with a player in the wrong way, while they're moving. And then you've also got to put into this the puck damage that they can get from players shooting the pucks, and referees and linesmen are usually around the boards to stay out of the way. And when the puck gets rifled around the boards, it can really hurt those guys. So it is a dangerous occupation. They know how to do it and they get used to it. And they would say that it's probably not that dangerous. But boy, it takes years, just like everything else, it takes years to perfect that trade and know how to stay out of harm's way when you're on the ice with 12 huge NHL hockey players all at one time.
Pretty big piece of news coming out of Vancouver on Tuesday. JT Miller has taken a personal leave of absence. He was benched during the third period of the game against Nashville on Sunday and had really been showing some outward frustration on the bench. And according to Post Media's Patrick Johnson, this is not substance or alcohol abuse, but more, it's being suggested that this is a simple mental mindset. So the Canucks, who already have been without Brock Besser for over a week, now suffer another significant loss up front, and the Canucks fell on Tuesday evening 4-3 to the New York Rangers.
Yeah, and I don't like guessing at this stuff, but when it's not substance or alcohol abuse, it probably is a domestic issue. I'm not going to guess at what domestic issue, but domestic issues are there. And if your loved ones, any of them, from parents to wife to girlfriend to children, if there's an issue going on with any of them, that can lead to acting out. It can lead to, you know, things that have to get reset, or else you can't come back and be the same player when things are all good. So that would be what I would say that is going on in his life, and I hope it gets corrected as soon as possible.
He's a pretty intense player, and hopefully a little bit of time away will do him good, and he'll come back refreshed and help the Canucks moving forward. Let's have a little bit of good news on returns. On Tuesday evening, Robert Thomas, who missed 12 games with a broken ankle, had an assist in 23 minutes of ice time in his return against the Minnesota Wild. But in that game, Kirill Kaprizov with his 12th and 13th and a 4-2 win for the Minnesota Wild over the St. Louis Blues. And how about Braden Point, who missed 4 games with the lower body injuries? He scores 2 goals, including the overtime winner. And the Penguins, once again, blowing a lead in the third period. They had a 2-0 lead. Saw that go away, and Point with the winner, a little tuck in from behind the net. The one positive, I think, for the Penguins is that Tristan Jarry played quite well, making 32 saves, although the tying goal scored by Anthony Cirelli came kind of on a deflected puck that went off his stick, and Cirelli was kind of behind the net when he made the play out front.
It's another home loss that's a bad one. You lose home. I used to stress this all the time. I mean, you can have you can have boo-boos on the road and have bad ones on the road. And it's not nearly as bad as doing it in front of your home fans that are paying a lot of money to go and watch you play. And, I thought last night watching that game that Pittsburgh was playing a good game. If they're going to beat Tampa, I think Tampa's a good team. And thought, well, geez, maybe they're coming around. And Jari's playing well in net. And boy, but sure enough, it wasn't to be. And Tampa ends up going off with the victory.
In real numbers, Pittsburgh is 7-14 right now. 7-10-4, but certainly not there. I don't see them being close at the end, and I know that we have whipped them constantly, but I think for good reason.
They're not going to. They're down with the bottom feeders, and I just hate saying that because I have so much respect for Sidney Crosby and for Malkin and for Letang, and I just and really for Mike Sullivan too, and the job that he's done as coach there. And I think he's done an amazing job, and he keeps getting these, other assignments by in international hockey. He'll be part of the Four Nations, coaching there. So, it's as we've said on the show before, I'll say it again. What is the plan? Where is the plan? You can't see it from where I sit.
No, cannot as of right now, certainly. A couple other player notes. Philip Hedl, turns out he did not suffer a concussion when he ran into AndreMiller last week in a game against San Jose. He is expected to rejoin the team in Calgary on Thursday, but he's still listed to day-to-day with an upper body injury, and it is not said when he will get back into the Rangers lineup. And Kasperi Kapanen, claimed off waivers by Edmonton from St. Louis. He had only one goal in 10 games for the Blues. And certainly the Blues and the Oilers have been transacting a lot of business since the summer, since those offer sheets to Broberg and Holloway. So let's get into a couple of games from last night, actually more than a couple. I thought the Florida-Winnipeg rematch was one of the best games that I have seen this season. And on Saturday evening, Florida really punched the Winnipeg Jets in the mouth with a 5-0 victory. Great in all aspects of the game. And this was a terrific test for Winnipeg to respond. And Mark Scheifele gets his 9th career hat trick. Kyle Connor scores his 12th. Morgan Barron with 2 empty net goals, 21 seconds apart for his first 2 goals of the season. And I just thought that in a lot of respects, Winnipeg got tested. They were up 3-0 in this game. It became 3-2. Scheifele got his 3rd goal to make it 4-2. Then it was 4-3, and they had to kill a penalty where Barron got his first of the 2 empty net goals. And I thought this was great resilience by the Jets last night.
It was, and they showed themselves to be what we have seen over the first 20 games. And I was happy for the Jets that they were back clicking on all cylinders. And of course, don't forget Connor Hellebuck and how he plays for them and the confidence. And they're a different team. When he's in net, they just, I'm not to say that they don't play hard for Comrie. They do, but they just seem to be so confident with Hellebuck in there. And why shouldn't they be? I mean, he's a Vezina Trophy winner. So, but you bring up a great point. That was a great test. It could end up being the 2 teams that end up in the final this year. Who knows?
I thought they were very assertive in all 3 zones last night. And when you look back at the 2 losses that they had to Tampa and Florida, and you certainly don't want to lose games, but this is such a long season. And you can only think that coming back last night after those 2 losses, and it shows how you cope with adversity, has real long-term benefit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That you don't go into a slide, and give the coach credit too for that, for being able to push the right buttons after 2 losses. You get back home. Winnipeg is a long way from Florida, and you get back home and you push all the right buttons again. And here we go. And they're back off, not to pun intended, flying high.
And I think as the season goes on, this is certainly a game that the Jets are going to look to when they see adversity again down the road, because they certainly will. Hey, how about some bottom feeders doing a pretty good job over the last couple of nights? On Monday and Tuesday, the Anaheim Ducks, with back-to-back wins in Dallas and Chicago, they have won 3 straight. But before we move to the other clubs, I want to make a comment about Chicago, because they had a 2-1 lead going to the third period. Anaheim got a couple of goals, and there was just nothing from Chicago after that. They got 5 shots in the third period, and you just don't feel anything with that club.
No, and you don't see them improving. And we thought they'd be better because they did make a bunch of additions, and you don't see a lot of life there. And and I'll go back to what I said on Monday. Foligno called the team out for not paying the price enough. They benched Taylor Hall, or sat him out.
Yeah.
So they're trying to push buttons. And we talked about Jim Montgomery. I'm going to say now, Luke Richardson is a wonderful person. He's done a good job with no talent there. Yeah. I sure hope he doesn't pay the price if Chicago, keeps falling.
I want us to get into Chicago a little more, not right now, but probably early next week on Wraparound. Bedard's been kind of hot and cold. Did have a couple of assists last night, but certainly in his sophomore year, he is finding some challenges producing to the level that I think he is expecting, and certainly the Blackhawks want him to. How about Montreal? 3-0 win over Edmonton on Monday. Sam Montembeault, a 30-save shutout. But, of course, the Oilers respond last night, Tuesday, in Ottawa with a 5-2 win. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard, all 3 points apiece. But let's go back to Montreal. Pretty good job by them. They've got 2 shutouts this year, and the other one is against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, it appears that at least there's some magic dust there, that they've gotten their shutouts against some 2 pretty high-octane offenses.
Yeah, and Montreal, you don't know what to expect night after night. They're a young team. They got not a ton of talent, but I think if you take them too lightly, you might walk out of the building with not too much in your pocket, because Montreal they work hard every game. I want to mention one thing about the game in Ottawa last night.
Yeah.
Did you see the Evan Bouchard goal?
I did.
That's got to be one of the best top goals of the season. It has to be. He went end to end, and the way he undressed the defenseman that he went around and then popped it in the top corner. Tremendous goal by Evan Bouchard. He's not just a shooter, I guess, because that's all he's known for is that unbelievable slap shot from the point. But this was a Bobby Orr type, Brian Leach, Raymond Bourque type rush down the ice. And great to see. You don't see it that often anymore.
He's going to be making some serious cash after this season for sure. In San Jose on Monday, the Sharks with a 5-4 overtime win against Detroit. Red Wings led this game 3 times. Macklin Celebrini, first ever overtime winner. But it goes back with Detroit of you can't keep leaving points on the table. And this is why they're having such a difficult time taking that next step. And we're seeing it with Ottawa and we're seeing it with Buffalo. And we're going to repeat this until these teams either make that step or they play themselves out of the race completely.
And in Detroit, and Steve Yzerman's a very conservative, cerebral general manager. But at some point, it will be legit to fire the coach. if you don't think you're getting the results that your talent should be getting. So, here we've got the Jim Montgomery case that we started this show with. He gets fired with the record he's got. And you would have thought that it wouldn't be Montgomery that would go down first. Yeah. You would have thought it would have been something like Detroit, who are trying to get to that next level, but keep stumbling. And, that's where you're trying to figure out, well, what do we do to get to the next step? It'll be interesting to see how Stevie Yzerman navigates the next couple months if his team doesn't play the way he thinks they should play at the talent they have, if he doesn't see the improvement, if he doesn't see the game going the direction he thinks it should be going, it'll be interesting to see what steps he takes.
We don't like to speculate, but at the same time, how much leash does Derek Lalonde have?
I see. That's the thing. We don't know. Stevie is so conservative in his actions. I mean, he doesn't like long-term contracts. He doesn't remember with the Patrick Kane. That was a conservative contract. He gave him another conservative extension that he gave him this year. He went out on the limb a little bit with Tarasenko. He gave him a 3-year deal. But that's Stevie, not that's when he goes non-conservative. I mean, that's a 3-year deal. So what I'm saying is he knows Derek Lalonde, obviously, because Derek Lalonde was in Tampa. Stevie used to be the GM of Tampa. Yeah. Lalonde was Cooper's assistant. That's why he brought him to Detroit. Mm-hmm. But again, it doesn't matter if it's your brother coaching. If you're not getting the results that you believe you should be getting, you've got to change the voice at some point.
I thought he stuck with Jeff Blashill too long. And now you're wondering, as this team is expected to move forward and they're kind of in suspended animation here. I'm not sure what the plan is in Detroit right now. So, last game I want to talk about, Neil, Calgary Flames beat the Islanders in a shootout on Tuesday. And once again, the Islanders failed to hold the lead in the third period. They were up 1-0, got tied, wound up losing in the shootout. Dustin Wolf, 28 saves, and he had to survive a power play at the end of overtime and then stop both shots that he faced in the shootout. So the Flames, they're hanging in. I mean, they're in a wild card right now with a 10-6-3 record. They were third in the Pacific. And the Islanders just keep frittering points away late in games.
They do. And they're, the one thing you've got going in the East that the Islanders have to keep in banking on is that you got 7 teams that are going to make it right now. If you count Washington, which I do, I think Washington's in. Mm-hmm. You've got one spot open and you got everybody trying to push it away. So Boston isn't grabbing it. Certainly Pittsburgh isn't grabbing it. And so the Islanders still have that opportunity to get that last wild card spot. If they can wake up and stop blowing leads, gosh, they'd be well in there. They could get in there. So, we'll see. They got the goaltending. The Islanders do.
Varlamov was great last night.
Yeah, and we know how good Sorokin is. Yeah, they still have problems scoring goals. Barzal is still out of the lineup, and so we'll see. But it's again, like you said. Now about Dustin Wolf, the goalie for Calgary. A lot of people wouldn't know this, but he was goalie of the year 2 years in a row. In the American Hockey League, and he was also the AHL MVP one year. And that's really hard for a goaltender to achieve, to win an MVP award in any league, because those predominantly always go to, the best forward in the league. So Dustin Wolf's the real deal for the Calgary Flames.
Good tandem with Dan Vladar now that Jacob Markstrom has moved on to the New Jersey Devils. So, all right, next 2 nights, what do you like on the dance cards?
Well, I like the Vegas Golden Knights going into Toronto. I think that'll be very interesting, and we'll see what that brings. And then that's actually tonight, Wednesday night, that
Yes.
game takes place.
Yep.
And then there's a bunch of interesting games at Islanders at Detroit because of what we just talked about. What's Detroit doing? What's Islanders doing? Carolina, New Jersey, two teams that are top teams now. Joe Sacco will get his chance to win his first game against the Utah Hockey Club. Very good possibility he could do that. The Rangers are following the Islanders around Western Canada.
Yes, they are.
Notice that? And
Yeah.
they're getting, they're going into Calgary. That'll be an interesting one. Minnesota Wild get a great test to see, are they for real? Because they're going into Edmonton, and there's the Kaprizov versus Draisaitl and McDavid night. And so there are a lot of good games on Thursday night. You'll have a lot of games up on your screen because you won't want to miss any of them. Yeah. It's funny. I tune from the game I really want to see. I'll have 4 up on the screen, and then the game I really want to see, I'll use the whole screen for a while so I can really concentrate. And then I'll go back to the 4 again. On that night, tomorrow, Thursday night, you probably want to have all 4 up there all the time because you won't want to miss any of it.
Tuesday night stagger was so good because it really gave you the opportunity to watch all 7 games. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by tonight's lineup of games that I had Vegas and Toronto marked. And the one game on Thursday that you did not mention that I am looking forward to is Colorado at Washington, because this will be the first game without Alexander Ovechkin. And we have talked about the balance of Washington scoring all year. And this is going to be the first real test without their biggest gun.
Can you imagine if I told you that Carolina right now, if I told you at the beginning of the season that on November 20th, Carolina would be 13-4, you'd say, oh, okay. I mean, you probably wouldn't be, and then I told you, and guess what? Washington will be 13-4-1. You'd be like, no way, right? At the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I mean, same way in the West. I mean, you would have thought that somebody was out of their mind. They said, through 19 games, Winnipeg is 16-3, and Minnesota is 12-3-3 through their first 18 games. So that's the beauty of the sport, though, is its unpredictability. And when you look at some clubs that you thought were in for good seasons and it's not turning out that way, and then there are other clubs that you didn't figure were going to have good seasons, and they're right there at the top.
Yeah. So and as we say, that's why they play the games. And that's why you tune in every night, because if it was totally predictable, it would be boring. So it's totally unpredictable, and it makes it eager to sit down and watch the games every night.
And we certainly do. And we love it. And we have 2 nights of hockey coming up before we appear again on Short Shifts on Friday. So until then, on behalf of Neil, I'm Vic, and we'll speak to you again on Friday.